would think that the arrest warrant and the news that broke and the story, these are things that have to be taken care of before you can even worry about
There's a practical nature to dealing with whether or not he's going to be even
be available.
Yes.
I think I do think this, though. When a lot of teams, you might think the Bears are saying, oh, this might be a good thing. Actually, where the Bears would think the opposite. Think about how many times they said character between Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles yesterday. That was emphasized a lot.
Great point.
I actually have a fear that the Bears might be the team to say, oh, well, even though Byron Pringle had a similar issue.
With a baby in the back of the car.
Yeah, just let's up the ante there. So that was, if you're interpreting Bears with Bears, that might be a little more severe in the grand scheme of things.
The fatality part changes the math on this. And honestly, like the arrest warrant issued changes things. I think that it actually changes. It could end up changing the strategy for the Bears. Because if you were thinking, well, I can trade down to 4 because I'll either have Will Anderson or Jalen Carter, and I'll be fine with either one of those. If you're not certain whether or not Jalen Carter was even going to be available, it changes the way that you look at it. And I don't know what their board is. Like, we're just assuming because those are the 2 top defensive players, and you start looking at, well, quarterback, and then you look at Arizona and go, they probably would like to bolster their defense, so they're probably thinking one of those 2 players. And if you're sitting there in Indy's spot at 4, you're thinking, well, I'll be okay with the other one who's left. If you have concerns about Jalen Carter not being available, that raises the stakes on whether or not you're willing to let Will Anderson go out the door at number 3.
You don't want to be any lower than 2, theoretically, if you are indeed going down that path, Lawrence, you just described, because if you're committed to getting a generational talent as a defensive lineman, Will Anderson or Jalen Carter, now you can't think of Jalen Carter. Now you're thinking you got to get Will Anderson. Okay, then you're probably going to do that. But
bottom line, it hurts the Bears.
Everything.
This hurts the Bears. This is a net negative no matter what, because it removes value from the top of the draft.
Yes.
All the Bears want, the Bears have the top pick in this draft, and it befits them to have more interest in the highest possible picks. And to take Dane Brugler's number 1 overall player in the entire draft, and for now, remove him. We don't know if he's going to jail.
Right.
We don't know what's on the table. I don't know Georgia law, and we'll spend a segment going through exactly what the facts are of this case. But this removing this much value for the top of the draft hurts the Bears.
But I also wonder, there are apparently his story changed repeatedly, right? The first story was he was a mile away. He was nowhere near there. The next story was that he actually could see the taillights of the other car. He was driving behind him. And now it turns out that he was like right next to the car when this happened. So I think that element would have to be something that you would have to look at and consider as a team that espouses character issues being important.
That latter point is the strongest one, because you are, as Layla pointed out, a team that preaches everything about character in the building and all of these principles and acronyms. Then you can't just pivot and say, well, you know what, this guy that had an arrest warrant out and he gets a good lawyer and probably is going to be able to figure out a way to maneuver skillfully through this legally. One would think, if you're the Bears, you're in a quandary, because you just have defined a kind of player that you're going to have to now, because of that, probably avoid.
Yeah, that's it to me, is if you interpret Bears and Bears, they said so much about character yesterday. How much of that are they willing to walk back in a situation where you don't know? And this accident, I think, is in connection to this, was really jarring to read about and upsetting to read about as just somebody who didn't have a connection to it. Right. And I'm curious what the attitude about this is in Georgia. And you've got to think it's as upsetting as it was to read about for us, what that meant to them, and if public opinion really takes effect in here as well. I think there clearly is some justice that needed to be served. They wouldn't serve that arrest warrant if that were the case.
I understand that. It's an interesting point, but I also think it's hard to. I mean, let's look at Alabama as a comparison. In that environment, they're making decisions that they're getting away with. That they may be accepted by a town that is crazy about college sports.
Nate Oates is still out here.
That's right.
And
maybe Georgia's similar. I don't know. Maybe Athens, Georgia has that sort of environment where they don't feel this sort of anger that we may sense. They may feel like
they just bake in the fact that people die around their sports programs.
Oh, I think it might be the opposite, or else
I don't
why
know.
did they issue the arrest warrant so publicly when they did ahead of the combine? They know who this guy is.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between law enforcement and the fan base or the community. I don't know. Maybe that is the case. I would hope that would be the case, but I don't think we can assume anything about these college towns where sports change and affect the way people think as much as they do.
It would be different if he were still on their team too.
Yeah,
like it's one thing if he's coming back next year anchoring their defense. He's not there anymore.
If that's true, man, that is.
I'm just saying that's the way fans behave. Why do you think Alabama fans are reacting the way they are? Because that guy, they want him to lead them to a national championship.
Yeah,
Are we forgetting Deshaun Watson in Houston here? The multitude of people who protected him, and then when he said he wanted out, how that situation changed.
Yeah, good name.
True.
Yeah, so that's why
I think about it.
When you have a guy as your leading scorer, you're going to be more forgiving, or a guy who would be coming back to anchor your defense. Or, hey, let's localize it. If you have a fifth starter in your rotation, you're going to be a lot more maybe permissive.
Thanks for that.
I'm sorry, but that's the same kind of logic.
This is a legal investigation, at least. So there is a little more like black and white to it.
That's true.
In this
and
case,
someone's dead.
Two people.
Yeah.
Two people.
Yeah. I mean, what if his teammates?
Oh, God.
And a member of the Georgia staff. I remember seeing that and just thinking how tragic that was.
It was right after the championship, and I remember seeing that too and thinking,
January 15th.
Oh my God, what a horrible.
It was. They were coming from the celebration,
right? And knowing that, like it makes things even worse,
right?
You know, like that. And to look at it from the Bears' perspective, if you want a draft pivot for the Bears and say, all right, maybe this guy is not who we want, and maybe we don't want to be involved with anything that goes on with him, you go to Indianapolis and say, DeForest Buckner, please.
Well, yeah, I'm against that idea, Lawrence, because I feel like he's a potential salary cap casualty.
So you're saying let's wait it out and see?
Well, I'm saying like there will be some defensive tackles in free agency. I'm not saying get an older player, but he's an older player. And the idea that you could probably wait it out and there's a chance he'd be available, I think I would prefer that.
Try to avoid mixing the markets.
Exactly. I think I'd like to get players out of the draft picks, and then if you want to sign or trade, do that.
I'm just trying to find out.
Separate.
Help me with the disconnect between knowing this story, knowing that Carter had been interviewed, and how we got to the arrest warrant today. Because
he was scheduled to speak.
That's a really good.
This is what I'm trying to find, because obviously the NFL has its own private security arm. Teams have their own people. They're usually in touch with what's happening. What changed? How did his story change? How did they catch him in something?
Did he not show up for an interview, or
because it might have been a toxicology?
Okay, so cynically, I asked that question earlier, and I wondered if the release of this story by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution coincided with the NFL Combine in some way.
Exactly.
Because it feels that way. It does feel that way.
It feels like, was it Laramie Tunsil with the gas mask on the morning
That's
of
when it broke.
That's what I'm saying.
And
it
so,
feels like the timing of it.
I just want to know what teams obviously were reassured at some point going into this entire process. All of it, the way we're talking about him, the way he's being scouted, the ways of the mock drafts. There was not a mention of, he might be arrested. He might be.
There were character issues.
But that was more about taking plays off. That was more about conditioning. How are we being blindsided by this?
The police statement says this: the evidence demonstrated that both vehicles switched between lanes, drove in the center turn lane, drove in opposite lanes of travel, overtook other motorists, drove at high rates of speed in an apparent attempt to outdistance each other, aka racing. And these are details of the investigation that were released today.
Right.
Alcohol impairment, racing, reckless driving, and speed were a significant contributing factor to the crash. The toxicology report indicates the blood alcohol concentration was
0.197.
0.197.
Yeah.
So to me, all of these things, it takes time to gather evidence. And to me,
Dan,
maybe
that's a great question
just
he asked.
needed the
You
time.
have to admit, I mean, how did
the
this
timing
stay
of this is-
under wraps
Yeah.
as long as it stayed under wraps? And why? Why now?
If there's an investigation going on if he's been interviewed multiple times, and all of a sudden the league is just waking up to whoa, there's a warrant out for his arrest and he left the combine.
And again, I never want to let these guys off the hook this easy, because if you're Jalen Carter, how does this come up during these meetings with these teams? And if not, why not?
Yep.
What did you want to at least let these guys know
But I
what
don't
they're
think-
getting into?
I want to be careful about this. I don't think like the NFL told Georgia something. I think their investigation revealed this. It sounds like the kid was lying about it repeatedly.
Yes.
And it finally has come out, and now he's got to get the heck out of Dodge, leave Indy, and get back to Athens.
To me, Mully, it sounds like the police gave a little bit of leeway on this until they broke it down and probably were like, so you're not going to come back for this arrest warrant? All right, cool. We're going to make it public. You know, like if you're not going to abide by whether it was an agreement to come be interviewed again or whatever, we're gonna put out a warrant for your arrest, and we're going to make it public at the time when you most don't want something like that to be public.
Also, let's face it, how many daily police investigations are delayed because of a lack of cooperation?
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, come on.
Right. I mean, I think
That's
all of
life.
that is on the table until we know better about what happened here.